What would you do if a single moment of kindness turned your entire life upside down? Picture a chilly autumn afternoon in Riverside Park, where a 10-year-old boy named Ethan, with a heart as vast as the sky, notices a stranger in distress. Without a second thought, he hands over his inhaler, unaware that this man, Victor Grayson, is a billionaire whose gratitude will rewrite Ethan's future. A simple act, a fleeting choice, yet 24 hours later, everything changes. Feel the crisp air on your skin, hear the faint wheeze of a man struggling to breathe, and step into Ethan's shoes as he faces a life-altering moment. What happens next? Will Victor invite Ethan and his mother to his estate, revealing a life-changing gift? Or will Victor disappear, leaving behind a mysterious note that sets Ethan on a quest? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below with your choice, and let us know what you'd do in Ethan's place. While you're at it, please subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us as we bring you more heartwarming tales like this one. It was a brisk autumn day in Riverside Park when Victor Grayson, a titan of industry, sought solace after closing a monumental deal. The weight of his empire momentarily lifted. He inhaled the fresh air until his chest tightened. An asthma attack. He'd forgotten his inhaler. Panic surged as he stumbled to a bench, his breath shallow, his vision blurring. The park buzzed around him, joggers pounding the paths, dog walkers chatting, a man tossing crumbs to pigeons, but no one noticed his struggle. His hands shook, his mind raced with fear, and the world seemed to close in, the edges of his vision darkening like a storm rolling in. That's when Ethan, a bright-eyed boy kicking a soccer ball nearby, spotted him. The ball rolled too far, and as Ethan chased it, his sneakers scuffing the grass, he saw Victor's pale face and trembling hands. Without hesitation, he sprinted over, his small chest heaving with urgency. "Sir, are you okay?" Ethan's voice trembled with worry, his brown eyes wide with concern. Victor couldn't speak, his eyes pleading for help, his fingers gripping the bench so tightly his knuckles turned white. Ethan dug into his jacket pocket, pulling out his own inhaler, the plastic cool against his palm. "Here, take mine," he said, pressing it into Victor's hand with a determination that belied his age. With shaky fingers, Victor inhaled deeply, the medicine flooding his lungs like a lifeline. He exhaled, then inhaled again, the fog of panic lifting, the world steadying around him. You saved me," Victor rasped, his voice raw but filled with gratitude, his eyes locking onto Ethan's with a mix of disbelief and awe. Ethan grinned, his cheeks flushed with the warmth of doing something right. "My mom always says we should help when we can," he said simply, his words carrying the weight of a lesson learned through love. Moments later, a woman in a faded waitress uniform hurried down the path, her apron still tied around her waist, the faint scent of coffee and grease clinging to her. This was Lily, Ethan's mother, fresh off a grueling shift at the diner, her feet aching from hours on her feet. She scanned the park for her son, her heart racing with a mother's instinct. "Ethan, is everything okay?" she called, her steps quickening as she saw him with a stranger, her brow furrowing with concern. Her gaze darted to the inhaler in Victor's hand, and a flicker of fear passed through her. Ethan needed that inhaler for himself. Ethan nodded, his voice steady despite the intensity of the moment. "He couldn't breathe, so I gave him mine." Victor, steadier now, stood and tucked the inhaler into his pocket like a sacred relic, his movements deliberate, as if he were preserving a piece of this moment. "Your son. He helped me when no one else did. He's a rare soul," he said, his voice still hoarse but laced with sincerity. Lily offered a cautious smile, her exhaustion evident in the shadows under her eyes, her hands twisting the edge of her apron. "I'm just glad he was there," she said softly, her voice tinged with relief but also wariness. Victor pulled a sleek business card from his wallet, the gold lettering catching the sunlight like a promise. "I'm Victor. I'd like to stay in touch. You've given me more than you know," he said, his tone warm but commanding, the kind of voice that made people listen. Lily hesitated, her fingers brushing the card as she took it, her mind racing with questions. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure of what this moment meant, the card feeling heavier in her hand than it should have. That night, over a humble dinner of canned soup and crackers, the kitchen lit by a single flickering bulb. Ethan animatedly recounted the day's events, his hands waving as he relived every second. The small table was cluttered with mismatched dishes, the air carrying the faint scent of the soup they'd heated on their ancient stove. Lily listened, her thumb tracing the edges of the business card on the table, the gold lettering glinting in the dim light. Grayson Enterprises. She'd heard the name before, whispered in the diner, mentioned on the news, a name that carried the weight of wealth and power. Victor was one of the richest men in the city, a man whose world was as far from theirs as the stars Ethan loved to gaze at. The phone rang, startling her, the shrill sound cutting through the quiet hum of their apartment. "Hello," she answered cautiously, her voice low, her eyes flicking to Ethan, who paused mid-bite, his spoon hovering over his bowl. "Good evening, this is Victor Grayson. I hope I'm not interrupting," came the voice on the other end, warm but commanding, softened now with a kindness that made Lily's breath catch. "No, it's fine," she replied, glancing at Ethan, who leaned in, his curiosity piqued, his soup forgotten. "I wanted to thank your son again. I can't stop thinking about what he did. I'd like you both to come to my home tomorrow. I'd love to speak with you properly," Victor said, his words carrying a sincerity that made Lily's heart race. She paused, the invitation feeling surreal, a mix of hope and doubt swirling in her chest. But Victor's tone was genuine, and something in his voice made her want to trust him. "We'll be there," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. The next morning dawned with a quiet stillness, the kind that whispers of change, the air heavy with the promise of something new. Sunlight filtered through the cracked blinds of Lily and Ethan's tiny apartment, casting faint golden streaks across the peeling wallpaper, the light catching on the dust motes that danced in the air. Lily stood before a chipped mirror in their cramped bedroom, smoothing the collar of her best blouse, a faded blue one she'd worn to every important occasion for the past 5 years, its fabric soft from years of wear. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of the unknown, her fingers fumbling with the buttons as she tried to steady herself. She glanced at her reflection, her tired eyes tracing the lines of exhaustion etched into her face, the shadows under her eyes a testament to years of long shifts and sleepless nights. She'd spent the night tossing and turning, her mind racing with questions that refused to quiet. Who was Victor Grayson, really? Why had he invited them to his home? Was this a genuine gesture, or did he want something in return? The uncertainty gnawed at her, a quiet storm of doubt and hope swirling in her chest, her heart pounding as she imagined every possible outcome. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the air felt heavy with the scent of damp plaster and the faint tang of last night's soup still lingering in the kitchen, a reminder of the life they'd always known. In the doorway, Ethan tugged at the sleeves of his slightly too small jacket, his hair combed neatly to the side with a damp comb and a bit of gel he'd found in Lily's drawer, the scent of the gel sharp and artificial in the small space. The jacket was a hand-me-down from a neighbor, its cuffs frayed, the fabric a faded green that clashed with his sneakers, but Ethan wore it with pride, as if it were a suit of armor for the day ahead. "Do I look okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice a mix of nerves and excitement, his brown eyes wide with anticipation, reflecting the sunlight that streamed through the window. Lily turned, her heart swelling at the sight of him. So small, yet so brave, his innocence a stark contrast to the weight she carried. "You look perfect, sweetheart," she said, her voice catching slightly, a lump forming in her throat as she knelt down to adjust his collar, her fingers lingering on the fabric as if to anchor herself to this moment. Ethan's grin was pure, the kind that could melt the hardest hearts, and for a fleeting second, Lily forgot her worries, the warmth of his smile a balm to her anxious heart. But as she stood, the weight of the day pressed down again, her shoulders tensing as she glanced at the business card on the counter, its gold lettering a silent reminder of the unknown. The events of the previous day felt like a dream, a routine park visit, a stranger in need, and now an invitation to a world far beyond their own. Victor Grayson wasn't just any man. His name carried a weight she couldn't fully grasp, a name whispered in the diner by customers who spoke of skyscrapers and stock markets, of a man who could buy and sell dreams with a single signature. What could he possibly want with them? The question hung in the air, unanswered, As the faint hum of the city outside seeped through the thin walls, the distant sound of a siren a reminder of the life they were leaving behind, if only for a day. A glossy black car arrived outside their building, its engine purring softly, a stark contrast to the rattling buses and honking taxis that usually filled their street, the sound of the city a constant backdrop to their lives. Ethan's eyes widened. He'd only seen cars like this in movies, sleek and shiny, the kind that belonged to heroes or villains in the stories he loved, their polished surfaces reflecting the world like a mirror. He pressed his face to the window, his breath fogging the glass, his small hands leaving smudges as he whispered, "Mom, look." Lily joined him, her heart skipping a beat as the driver stepped out, tipped his hat, and opened the door with a practiced grace, his movements precise, almost mechanical. The man's uniform was crisp, his black gloves gleaming in the sunlight, and Lily couldn't help but notice the way he carried himself. Almost as if he were guarding a secret, his posture rigid, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. She gripped Ethan's hand a little tighter, her pulse quickening, her palms sweaty against his small fingers. This wasn't her world. The leather seats, the scent of polished wood and faint cologne, the silence that felt heavy with wealth, a silence that seemed to swallow the noise of the city outside. She hesitated at the threshold of the car, her mind flashing back to a moment years ago when she'd taught Ethan to always help others. She'd been on her way to the diner, late for her shift, her apron already stained with coffee, when she'd stopped to help an elderly woman cross the street, her arms full of groceries, the woman's hands trembling with age. The woman had smiled, her eyes crinkling with gratitude, and Lily had felt a warmth that stayed with her through the long, grueling hours that followed, a warmth that reminded her why she kept going. That day, she'd told Ethan, "We help because it's right, not because we expect anything back." Now, as she climbed into the car, that lesson felt like a distant echo, overshadowed by the uncertainty of what lay ahead, her heart pounding as she wondered if she'd made the right choice in accepting Victor's invitation. The drive through the city was a blur, a dreamlike journey that carried them from their familiar world of cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights to a realm of open spaces and manicured lawns. The transition so gradual, yet so stark that it felt like stepping into another world. Ethan pressed his nose to the window, his breath fogging the glass, watching as the concrete jungle gave way to sprawling estates, each more grand than the last, their gates tall and imposing, their gardens a riot of color. "Look, Mom, a fountain," he exclaimed, pointing at a marble structure that sprayed water in graceful arcs, the droplets catching the sunlight like tiny diamonds. Lily nodded, but her mind was elsewhere, tangled in a web of doubt that refused to loosen its grip. What if this was a mistake? What if Victor's intentions weren't as pure as they seemed? She'd heard stories at the diner, tales of wealthy men who used their power to manipulate, to take more than they gave, their smiles as sharp as knives. Her fingers tightened around Ethan's hand, her nails digging slightly into her palm as she fought to push the thoughts away, her breath shallow as she tried to focus on the scenery outside. The car turned up a winding driveway, and towering iron gates loomed ahead, parting slowly to reveal an estate straight out of a fairy tale, the gates creaking softly as they opened, a sound that sent a shiver down Lily's spine. Fountains sparkled in the sunlight, statues of angels and lions stood sentinel, their stone eyes seeming to watch as the car passed, and rows of lavender stretched like purple rivers across the grounds, their scent drifting through the open window, sweet and calming. The mansion itself rose up with quiet grandeur, its marble pillars and glass windows gleaming like a beacon of another life, the kind of life Lily had only seen in magazines, a life that felt as distant as the stars Ethan dreamed of reaching. Lily's breath caught in her throat, a mix of awe and fear washing over her, her chest tightening as she realized just how far they'd come from their tiny apartment. This was a place of power, of wealth beyond her wildest dreams, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they didn't belong, that they were intruders in a world that could swallow them whole. The car stopped, and the front door opened before they could knock, the heavy wood swinging inward with a soft creak. A man stood there, no longer the desperate figure on the park bench, but a composed host in a soft gray sweater and tailored trousers, his posture straight, his presence commanding yet warm. His smile was genuine, but there was a weight to his presence that made Lily's stomach twist, a quiet intensity that made her wonder who he really was. "Welcome," he said, stepping forward, his voice smooth and commanding, the kind of voice that could silence a room. "It's so good to see you again." Ethan waved shyly, his earlier excitement tempered by the grandeur around him, his small hand trembling slightly as he raised it. Lily nodded, her voice caught in her throat, her eyes darting around the entryway as she tried to make sense of the man before her. She studied him, searching for clues to his identity, her mind racing as she pieced together the fragments of the day before. He hadn't introduced himself as Victor Grayson in the park, only as Victor, and the business card had been her only hint, its gold lettering a silent promise of something more. Now, standing in this opulent home, she felt the pieces clicking into place, but the puzzle was still incomplete, the edges jagged with uncertainty. "Come in, please," the man urged, leading them inside, his steps measured, his hand gesturing toward the interior with a grace that spoke of years of confidence. The interior was breathtaking. A grand staircase swept upward, its banister carved with intricate vines that seemed to twist and curl like living things, and a chandelier glittered like a constellation, casting prisms of light across the marble floors, the colors dancing like a rainbow. Paintings older than Lily's family lineage adorned the walls, their colors rich and vibrant, the faces in the portraits seeming to watch as they passed, their eyes following with a silent curiosity. Yet the home felt warm, not cold, the air carrying the faint scent of cedar and fresh flowers, a soft melody playing from somewhere deep within the house, a piano tune that seemed to dance with the sunlight, its notes light and airy. The man guided them to a sitting room where sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating cream-colored furniture that looked softer than anything Lily had ever touched, the cushions plump and inviting, the fabric shimmering slightly in the light. A fireplace crackled softly, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill of their old apartment, the flames casting flickering shadows on the walls, the scent of burning wood mingling with the fragrance of fresh lilies, their white petals glowing in a vase on the coffee table. "Please sit," the man said, gesturing to a plush couch, his voice gentle but firm, his hand motioning with a quiet authority. Lily sat stiffly, careful not to disturb anything, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her fingers twisting together as she tried to calm her racing heart. Ethan sank into the cushions beside her, his eyes wide with wonder, taking in every detail. The way the sunlight danced on the walls, the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, the softness of the couch that seemed to hug him, its warmth a comfort he'd never known. The man sat across from them, his expression gentle but serious, and for the first time, Lily noticed the lines on his face, the faint shadows under his eyes, the way his hands rested on his knees, steady but slightly tense. He looked like a man who carried the weight of the world, yet there was a softness in his gaze that made her want to trust him, a vulnerability that made her wonder what lay beneath his polished exterior. "I invited you here because yesterday wasn't just a moment of crisis for me. It was a revelation," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, his eyes locking onto Ethan's with a warmth that made the boy sit up a little straighter. Lily tilted her head, listening intently, her earlier doubts battling with a growing curiosity, her breath shallow as she waited for him to continue. "I've spent my life in boardrooms, chasing deals, working endless days since I was Ethan's age. I've won awards, built an empire, but none of that compares to the moment a boy, with nothing to gain, ran to a stranger and handed him the one thing that could save his life," he said, his voice softening, a faint tremor in his words as he spoke. He looked at Ethan, his eyes shimmering with something raw, a flicker of pain and gratitude passing across his face like a shadow. "You didn't ask who I was. You didn't hesitate. You just helped. That kind of kindness, it's rare. It's invaluable," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, the weight of his words filling the room. Ethan blushed, looking down at his hands, his cheeks burning with a mix of pride and shyness, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his jacket. Lily's heart raced as she watched the man, her mind still grappling with his identity, the pieces falling into place with a clarity that made her breath catch. He hadn't said his full name, but the estate, the car, the business card. It all pointed to one truth. He was Victor Grayson, the billionaire, the man whose name was synonymous with power in the city. But why was he telling them this? What did he want? The questions swirled in her mind, a storm of uncertainty that refused to quiet. Victor turned to Lily, his voice steady but warm, his eyes holding hers with a sincerity that made her doubts waver, if only for a moment. I thought about this all night, and I don't want this to end with a thank you. I want to do something for you both, he said, his words deliberate, each one carrying the weight of a promise. He reached for a folder on the table, opened it with deliberate care, his fingers steady as he pulled out a stack of documents, the paper crisp and white, the edges perfectly aligned. He slid them toward Lily, his movements slow, as if giving her time to prepare for what was coming. This is a transfer of funds, $2 million, to be placed in a secure trust in your name. No strings, no expectations. A gift, he said, his voice calm but firm, his eyes never leaving hers. Lily froze, her breath catching in her throat, the number echoing in her mind like a drumbeat, a sum so vast it felt like a mirage, something she could see but not touch. Her hands trembled as she reached for the documents, her fingers brushing the crisp paper as if it might disappear, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Victor could hear it. And Victor continued, his voice softening, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I've selected 3 homes in the city. You can choose any one. They're fully paid, move-in ready. No more rent, no more worries about broken pipes or drafty windows. Lily shook her head, dazed, her mind spinning, the room tilting slightly as she tried to process his words. Mr. Grayson, it's too much, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, her hands clutching the documents as if they might anchor her to reality. Her heart pounded, a mix of gratitude and fear coursing through her. The fear that this was too good to be true, that there was a catch she couldn't see, a price she couldn't afford to pay. Victor smiled gently, his eyes holding hers with a sincerity that made her doubts waver, a warmth that seemed to reach into her very soul. No, it's exactly enough. Because your son gave me something I didn't even know I needed, he said, his voice soft but firm, his words carrying a weight that made Lily's breath catch. A memory flashed in Victor's mind, unbidden, a moment from years ago when he'd lost his younger sister, Clara, to a sudden asthma attack. He'd been 20, working late at his first job, the fluorescent lights of the office harsh against his tired eyes, when he got the call. By the time he reached the hospital, she was gone, her small hand cold in his, her laughter a memory that would haunt him for years. The guilt had hardened him, driving him to build walls of wealth and power, to bury his pain in success, to become a man who could control everything, except the one thing that mattered most. But Ethan's act had cracked those walls, the memory of Clara's smile flickering in his mind as he'd taken that first breath from the inhaler, the medicine a lifeline that brought him back to a moment he'd thought he'd lost forever. He saw her in Ethan's selflessness, in the way the boy had run to him without hesitation, his small frame a beacon of hope in a world that had felt so dark. He didn't share this with Lily, but the weight of it shimmered in his eyes, a silent testament to why this moment meant so much, a vulnerability that made him seem more human than the billionaire the world knew. Lily's eyes filled with tears as she clutched Ethan's hand, her fingers trembling against his small, warm palm, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the midst of her swirling emotions. "We've never had help like this," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of gratitude and disbelief, her tears spilling over as she tried to find the words to express what she felt. "That's exactly why you deserve it," Victor replied, his voice soft but firm, his words a balm to her aching heart. The room fell silent, but it was a sacred kind of quiet, heavy with gratitude and possibility. The crackle of the fireplace the only sound breaking the stillness, its warmth wrapping around them like a promise. Ethan looked up at his mother, his voice small but hopeful, his eyes shining with a dream he'd never dared to voice before, a dream that now felt within reach. "Mom, we could have a real house. You wouldn't have to work so much," he said, his words piercing Lily's heart, a reminder of the long hours she'd spent at the diner, the nights she'd come home too exhausted to play with him, the guilt that had weighed on her every time she'd had to say no to something he wanted, the toys he'd never had, the trips they'd never taken. She nodded, tears spilling over, her vision blurring as she looked at Victor, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Thank you. I don't even know how to say it," she said, her voice breaking, her hands trembling as she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, the gesture raw and unguarded, a mother's vulnerability laid bare. "You already did," Victor said softly. "The moment you raised a boy who'd give his only inhaler to a stranger." The rest of the morning unfolded in warmth, a gentle contrast to the tension that had gripped Lily earlier, the air lightening as they moved through the estate. Victor showed them around, guiding Ethan through a library filled with ancient books, maps, and tales of adventure, the room smelling of old leather and ink, the shelves stretching to the ceiling like a forest of knowledge. Ethan ran his fingers along the spines, his eyes wide with wonder, his small hands trembling with excitement as he pulled out a book about famous pilots, its cover faded, but its pages filled with stories of the sky. "You can borrow any book you like," Victor said, and Ethan's face lit up, his fingers lingering on the book as if it were a treasure. Victor described the homes they could choose from, each with a yard, a bright kitchen, and space to grow, one with a treehouse in the backyard, another with a porch swing, and the third with a garden perfect for planting flowers, the kind of garden Lily had always dreamed of but never thought she'd have. Lily listened, her heart slowly opening to the possibility of a new life, though a small part of her still wondered if this was too good to be true, if there was a catch she couldn't see, a shadow waiting to fall. When it was time to leave, Victor stood at the door, hands in his pockets, his expression a mix of gratitude and hope, his eyes soft as he watched them. "This isn't goodbye," he said, his voice warm, a promise woven into his words. "It's just the beginning." Ethan gave him a quick, clumsy hug, his small arms wrapping around Victor's waist, the gesture so pure it brought a lump to Lily's throat. Victor chuckled, ruffling Ethan's hair with a tenderness that surprised Lily, a tenderness that made her see him not as a billionaire, but as a man who'd been touched by her son's kindness. She watched the exchange, her earlier doubts softening, replaced by a cautious hope, a flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, this was real. Back in the car, Lily held the folder on her lap like it was a fragile dream, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper, the weight of it grounding her as the car pulled away. Ethan leaned against her, tired but glowing, his head resting on her shoulder, his breathing soft and steady. The world outside looked different, not because it had changed, but because they had, the lavender fields fading into the distance as the city came back into view, its skyline a reminder of the life they were leaving behind. The drive back was quiet, the city unfolding in reverse, lavender fields giving way to concrete, the hum of wealth fading into the familiar chaos of their neighborhood, the honking of horns and the chatter of pedestrians a stark contrast to the silence of the estate. But as they stepped back into their apartment, the cracked walls and flickering lights felt like a memory of a life they were leaving behind, a life that no longer fit the people they were becoming. Weeks later, they moved into their new home, a 2-story house with a wraparound porch and a backyard that seemed to stretch forever, the grass soft underfoot, the air carrying the scent of fresh earth and blooming roses. Sunlight streamed through sheer curtains, painting the trimmed grass and flower beds in golden hues, the light catching on the petals of daisies that lined the walkway, their yellow centers bright against the green. Inside, Lily stood in the kitchen, a warm mug of tea in her hands, the hum of a new refrigerator a quiet comfort, its steady sound a stark contrast to the rattling heater of their old apartment. The space was bright, the countertops gleaming, and a vase of daisies sat on the table, a housewarming gift from the realtor, their petals soft and delicate, a symbol of new beginnings. The cramped apartment with its flickering lights and rattling heater was a distant memory, replaced by a home that felt like a sanctuary, its walls thick enough to hold in laughter and dreams, but not so thick as to shut the world out. Lily closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the tea seep into her hands, the steam rising in soft curls, and for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of peace, a quiet joy that settled into her bones. She thought of the diner, the endless shifts, the way her feet ached after 12-hour days, the nights she'd cried herself to sleep worrying about rent, the constant fear that she wasn't doing enough for Ethan. That life was gone, replaced by a future she'd never dared to imagine. A future where she could breathe, where she could dream, where she could be the mother she'd always wanted to be. Ethan bounded down the stairs, his socked feet sliding on the polished wood, his laughter echoing through the house, a sound so pure it made Lily's heart ache with joy. "Mom, the movers put up my poster, the one with the airplane," he called, his eyes sparkling as if he'd claimed a piece of the sky, his voice brimming with excitement, his small frame practically vibrating with energy. Lily set her cup down, smiling, her heart lifting at the sound of his joy, the warmth of his voice wrapping around her like a hug. "That's wonderful, honey. Want to show me?" she asked, her voice soft, her eyes crinkling with a smile as she followed him upstairs. He grabbed her hand, pulling her along, his energy infectious, his small hand warm in hers as they climbed the stairs, the wood creaking softly under their weight. His room was bathed in light, a wide window overlooking a backyard where a small swing hung from an oak tree, its ropes swaying gently in the breeze, the leaves rustling softly in the wind. On the wall above his bed was the poster, a sleek jet soaring through the clouds, its wings glinting in the sunlight, the sky behind it a brilliant blue that seemed to stretch forever. "I put it up so I can see it when I wake up," Ethan said proudly, his chest puffing out, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "It reminds me I can go anywhere." Lily's throat tightened, a wave of emotion washing over her, her eyes stinging with tears as she looked at the poster, at the boy who'd made this moment possible. She remembered the nights she'd tucked him into bed in their old apartment, the way he'd point to the ceiling and pretend it was the sky, dreaming of flying while she worried about the next bill, the weight of their struggles a constant shadow over his dreams. Now, those dreams felt within reach, and the weight of that realization brought tears to her eyes, her vision blurring as she pulled Ethan into a hug, holding him close, the scent of his shampoo grounding her in this new reality, the warmth of his small body a reminder of why she'd kept going all those years. Downstairs, boxes still lined the corners, picture frames waiting to be hung, their edges slightly worn from years of being moved from one temporary home to another, the glass smudged with fingerprints from Ethan's curious hands. But the house was already a home, filled with the scent of lavender candles and the promise of meals cooked with love, the air carrying the faint hum of a new life taking root. Lily wandered into her new office, a space she'd never imagined having. The walls painted a soft cream that seemed to glow in the afternoon light, the sunlight streaming through the window in golden waves. For years, she'd scribbled budgets and dreams in the margins of old notebooks, hunched over a tiny counter in their apartment, the flicker of a dying bulb her only light, the sound of the city outside a constant reminder of the world she couldn't escape. Now, a real desk sat by a window, books stacked neatly beside a laptop, their covers crisp and new, the pages filled with the promise of a future she could build. She'd enrolled in online classes for business management, dreaming of opening a bakery, a dream she'd once buried under the weight of survival, a dream she'd thought was too fragile to hold. She ran her fingers along the desk, the wood smooth under her touch, and imagined the recipes she'd create, the smell of fresh bread filling the air, the laughter of customers who'd feel at home in her space, the kind of space she'd always wanted to create but never thought she could. The dream felt solid now, like the foundation beneath her feet, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it could come true, her heart swelling with a hope she hadn't felt in years. That afternoon, the doorbell rang, its chime a soft melody that still felt foreign to Lily, a sound that belonged to this new life they were building. Ethan raced to answer it, his sneakers squeaking on the hardwood floor, his laughter trailing behind him like a melody. He found a small envelope on the welcome mat, addressed to Lily in elegant handwriting, the paper thick and smooth, the ink a deep blue that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. She opened it carefully, her fingers trembling as she pulled out a single sheet of fine paper, the words written in ink that seemed to glow. "Kindness always finds its way back. Stay true to yourself. Victor." Beneath it was a legal document, a scholarship for Ethan, full tuition, any school, any dream. Lily's hands shook as she sat down on the porch steps, the letter in her lap, the warm wood beneath her a grounding contrast to the whirlwind in her mind. the scent of roses drifting up from the garden, sweet and calming. Ethan looked at her, curious, his brow furrowing as he sat beside her, his small hand resting on her arm. "What does it say, Mom?" he asked, his voice soft, his eyes searching hers. She turned to him, tears streaming down her cheeks, her voice trembling with a mix of joy and disbelief, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "It says your future is waiting for you. You just have to chase it," she said, her words a whisper, her tears falling onto the letter as she spoke. Ethan's face lit up, and he threw his arms around her, his small body warm against hers, his laughter a sound of pure joy that echoed through the quiet afternoon. Lily held him tight, the letter crinkling between them, and in that moment, she felt the weight of their old life lift completely, replaced by a future as bright as the sunlight streaming through the trees, a future where Ethan could soar, where she could build, where they could thrive. That evening, they cooked dinner together, not out of necessity, but for joy, the kitchen a haven of warmth and laughter. They made cheesy pasta, the kitchen filling with the rich scent of melting cheese and garlic, the air warm with the hum of the oven and the clatter of pots. They laughed as Ethan accidentally flicked sauce onto the counter, the red splatter a stark contrast to the white tiles, his giggles filling the room as Lily wiped it away with a smile. The table was set with care, the napkins folded into neat triangles, the plates mismatched but loved, and Lily poured herself a rare glass of wine, the deep red liquid catching the light, its color warm and inviting. They sat down, the clink of forks blending with the soft rustle of wind outside, the open window letting in the scent of blooming jasmine, its sweetness mingling with the savory aroma of their meal. "I like it here," Ethan said, twirling his pasta, his voice soft but certain, his eyes bright with contentment. "I don't miss the old place." Lily squeezed his hand, her heart full, her fingers warm against his. "Me neither," she said, her voice a whisper, her eyes crinkling with a smile as she looked at him, the boy who'd changed everything with a single act of kindness. Later, as stars peeked through the curtains, their light faint but steady, Lily stood by the window, the letter in her hand, her reflection faint in the glass, the night outside a canvas of possibilities. She thought of Victor, not as the billionaire the world knew, but as the man on the bench, gasping for air, a man humbled by a boy's selflessness, a man who'd seen something in Ethan that the world had overlooked. She tucked the letter into her desk drawer, a cornerstone of their new life, and as she turned off the light, the house seemed to sigh with contentment, its walls holding the promise of a future they'd never thought possible, a future built on kindness, on love, on the belief that one small act could change everything. Years passed, and their new rhythm took root, a steady heartbeat of hope and growth, the days unfolding with a quiet beauty that felt like a gift. Ethan attended a summer aviation camp, returning with stories of pilots and dreams of flying, his journal filled with sketches of planes and notes about aerodynamics. The pages crinkled from being carried everywhere he went. He'd spent a week in the mountains, sleeping under the stars, learning to navigate by constellations, the air cool and crisp, the sky so clear he felt he could touch the stars. The experience had lit a fire in him, a determination to soar beyond the limits of his old life, his eyes bright with the kind of wonder that only comes from seeing the world from a new perspective. Lily opened her bakery, the warm loaf, a cozy spot loved by locals, its walls painted a soft yellow that seemed to glow with warmth, the air always filled with the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon. The first day had been a whirlwind, kneading dough at dawn, the scent of yeast and sugar filling the air, the nervous flutter in her stomach as she flipped the open sign, her hands trembling as she waited for the first customer. But the customers came, drawn by the smell of fresh bread and the promise of a place that felt like home, their laughter filling the space as they shared stories over coffee and pastries. And by the end of the week, Lily had a line out the door, her heart swelling with pride as she watched her dream take root. They dreamed out loud, Ethan sketching planes, his pencil scratching softly against the paper, Lily planning new recipes, her voice soft as she described a new kind of bread she wanted to try, their voices mingling with the hum of the oven and the laughter of neighbors who'd become friends, their home a haven of warmth and possibility. Occasionally, a note from Victor arrived, always brief, sometimes just a quote. Keep dreaming. His presence lingered like a warm breeze, a reminder of the day that had changed everything, a day that felt both distant and ever-present, its echoes woven into the fabric of their lives. One night, under a sky full of stars, the moon a silver crescent above them, Ethan asked, "Mom, do you think I'll ever do something like that for someone else?" His voice was soft, his eyes fixed on the moon, its light casting a gentle glow on his face. Lily smiled, her heart full, her hand resting on his shoulder as she looked up at the sky with him. "You already have, sweetheart. But yes, one day, you'll do even more," she said, her voice a whisper, her words a promise as much as a hope. Ethan's desire to give back grew stronger, a quiet fire that burned brighter with each passing year, a flame that had been kindled in the park and now blazed with purpose. He started volunteering at the Maple Haven Community Center, a shelter a few blocks from their home, its faded sign out front welcoming those seeking a fresh start. Meals, beds, job counseling, a place to begin again. The building was old, its paint peeling, the windows smudged with years of wear, but inside, it buzzed with life, the scent of soap and warm bread mingling with the faint creak of wooden floors, the air filled with the soft hum of conversation and the clatter of trays. Ethan's first day was quiet but meaningful, his hands busy as he stacked canned goods in the pantry, the metal cool against his palms, handed out blankets to guests who arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs, their eyes shadowed with exhaustion, and served soup during the lunch rush, the steam rising in soft curls as he ladled it into bowls, the broth a warm golden color that seemed to glow in the dim light. Some guests kept their heads down, their shoulders hunched, their eyes fixed on the floor. Others offered tired smiles, their gratitude silent but palpable, a flicker of hope in their weary gazes. A few shared stories, fragments of lost jobs, broken dreams, and faint hopes, their voices low as if afraid to hope too loudly, their words a tapestry of struggle and resilience. One man, a former mechanic named Sam, told Ethan about the car he'd once rebuilt from scratch, his hands gesturing as if he could still feel the wrench in his grip, his eyes lighting up with a spark of pride as he described the engine's roar. Ethan listened, his heart aching for the man's loss, and promised to bring him a book about cars the next time he came, his voice steady with a sincerity that made Sam's smile widen, a small gesture that felt like a lifeline in the midst of his storm. Lily joined him on her day off, bringing her famous carrot ginger soup, the pot heavy in her arms as she walked through the shelter's doors, the scent of ginger and spices trailing behind her like a promise of warmth. She moved through the room with ease, chatting with guests like old friends, her warmth filling the space, the clatter of spoons and soft murmurs of conversation a comforting backdrop, the air alive with the hum of connection. She knelt beside a young mother, her baby asleep in her arms, the child's small chest rising and falling with each breath, and offered her an extra serving, her voice gentle as she asked about the child's name, her eyes soft with understanding. The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Thank you," her voice breaking, her hands trembling as she held her baby a little tighter. Lily's heart swelled, a reminder of why she'd started this journey with Ethan, to give back, to make a difference, to show the world the same kindness her son had shown Victor, to create a space where people could feel seen, where they could feel loved. Helping others felt natural to Ethan, a part of him now as much as his dreams of flying, a calling that had taken root in his heart and refused to let go. "It feels good," he said, drying trays at the back table, the dishwater warm against his hands, the scent of soap lingering in the air as he worked. Lily nodded, watching him, her eyes soft with pride, her heart full as she saw the boy he was becoming. "It's funny how simple it is to start, and how hard it is to stop," she said, her voice a whisper, her words a reflection of the journey they'd shared, a journey that had begun with a single act of kindness and now stretched into a legacy of love. They became regulars at the shelter, known by name, their presence a steady light in a place that often felt shadowed, their laughter a melody that echoed through the halls. Ethan helped kids with homework, his voice patient as he explained fractions, his pencil scratching softly against the paper as he drew diagrams, read stories about adventure and courage, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the tales, and even brought his telescope to show them the stars, setting it up in the lot behind the building under a sky that seemed to stretch forever, the air cool against his skin as he pointed out constellations. "The sky belongs to everyone," he'd say, his voice filled with wonder as the kids gasped at the sight of Jupiter's moons, their eyes wide with awe, their dreams stretching as far as the stars they gazed at. Word spread, and one afternoon, as they unpacked donations, boxes of clothes and canned goods, the cardboard damp from a recent rain, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth, a familiar black car pulled up outside, its engine purring softly, a sound that cut through the hum of the shelter. Lily recognized it immediately, her heart skipping a beat as she set down a bag of sweaters, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped them on her apron. Ethan didn't notice at first, too focused on untangling cords for the shelter's beat-up speakers, his brow furrowed in concentration, his fingers fumbling with the knots. But Lily knew that car, knew the man who stepped out before the door even opened, her breath catching as she watched him approach. Victor stepped out, his dark blazer casual, his presence humble, the same quiet strength he always carried like a second skin, his steps soft on the gravel as he approached the shelter. He entered not as a guest of honor, but as a man who understood humility, his steps soft on the creaky floor, his eyes scanning the room with a quiet reverence. Ethan turned and broke into a grin, his face lighting up, his hands dropping the cords as he ran to him. "Mr. Grayson," he called, his voice bright with excitement, his small frame practically vibrating with joy. They shook hands, Ethan's small hand firm in Victor's, and Victor took in the scene. The laughter, the warmth, the way Ethan moved among the guests like he belonged, like he was part of the place's rhythm, his laughter mingling with the clatter of trays and the hum of conversation, a melody of connection that filled the space. "You've got a big heart, Ethan," Victor said softly, his voice a little softer than usual, his eyes tracing the boy's movements with a mix of pride and wonder, a warmth that made Ethan stand a little taller. "I see now that what happened in the park wasn't just a lucky moment for me. It was the start of who you were always meant to be," he said, his words a quiet affirmation, a testament to the boy Ethan had become. Ethan smiled, unsure how to respond, his cheeks flushing with a mix of pride and shyness, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Later, when the shelter had quieted down and the last of the dinner trays were rinsed and stacked, the scent of soap lingering in the air, the room bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, they sat on a bench outside, the street lamp casting a pale yellow glow, its light flickering slightly in the evening breeze. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't been there that day?" Ethan asked, his voice soft, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the city lights glowed like distant stars, their light a faint echo of the sky he loved. Victor looked thoughtful, his gaze distant, as if he were seeing that day in the park all over again. The panic, the shallow breaths, the small boy running toward him with an inhaler in his hand, his small frame a beacon of hope in a moment of darkness. "Sometimes," he admitted, his voice low, his hands resting on his knees, steady but slightly tense. "But I think more about what you chose to do after. I guess I just feel like I was lucky to help, and now I want to make sure other people get lucky too," Ethan said, his voice soft but certain, his words a reflection of the boy he'd become, a boy who understood the power of kindness. Victor smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that softened the lines of his face, his eyes crinkling with a warmth that made Ethan's heart swell. "That's not luck, Ethan," he replied. "That's legacy." Time moved forward, slow and fast all at once, the days blending into weeks, the weeks into years, each moment a thread in the tapestry of their lives. The shelter thrived, its walls repainted with donations from the community, the once faded sign now bright with new paint, its tables filled with laughter and hope, the air alive with the hum of connection. Lily's bakery grew, and she started offering free baking classes on weekends for single parents. Her kitchen a haven of flour-dusted counters and warm smiles, the scent of cinnamon and vanilla a constant comfort to those who walked through her doors. Ethan entered high school with a quiet confidence shaped by gratitude, his shoulders a little broader, his voice a little deeper, but his heart still as big as ever, a heart that had been shaped by kindness and now sought to share it with the world. He kept volunteering, mentoring younger kids, helping them find their place, his patience a steady anchor in their stormy lives, his voice gentle as he helped them with their homework, his laughter a melody that lifted their spirits. He'd set up his telescope, gifted by Victor on his 13th birthday, its metal cool against his hands, and show them the stars, sparking their dreams, his voice filled with wonder as he pointed out the Big Dipper and told stories of pilots who'd flown through storms to reach the sky, his words painting pictures of a world beyond their struggles. By graduation, Ethan earned a scholarship to a top university for aerospace engineering, universities competing for him not just because of his grades, but because of who he was, a boy who'd turned kindness into a legacy, a boy who'd shown the world what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. Victor invited him to dinner at the estate, a quiet meal of grilled chicken and roasted vegetables, the table set with care, the candles casting a warm glow across the room, their light flickering softly in the evening air. "You'll do incredible things," Victor said, his voice steady but warm, his eyes soft as he looked at Ethan, the boy who'd changed his life. "But remember, your greatness isn't in how far you fly. It's in how many hands you lift along the way." Ethan nodded, his eyes misty, the weight of those words settling into his heart, a promise he intended to keep. "You changed my life," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, his hands trembling slightly as he spoke. Victor placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm but gentle, his eyes shimmering with a gratitude that words couldn't capture. "No, Ethan, you changed mine," he said, his voice a whisper, his words a testament to the bond they'd built, a bond forged in a moment of kindness that had rippled outward, touching lives they'd never see. College brought challenges, but Ethan stayed grounded, his roots deep in the lessons he'd learned from Victor and Lily, his heart anchored by the kindness that had shaped him. He studied hard, made friends, and worked late nights in labs under starry domes, the hum of machinery a constant companion as he built models of planes that could one day touch the sky, his hands steady as he adjusted the wings, his mind racing with possibilities. But he also founded a campus group for community outreach, students tutoring kids, collecting supplies, hosting STEM days at local schools, their laughter echoing through gymnasiums as they built paper airplanes and dreamed of flight, their dreams as bright as the stars Ethan loved. He'd learned that brilliance meant nothing without compassion, that the sky was only worth reaching if you brought others with you, a lesson that guided him through every challenge, every triumph. Back home, Lily ran the warm loaf with love, her hands kneading dough with the same care she'd once used to tuck Ethan into bed, the scent of fresh bread a constant comfort to her customers, a reminder of the home she'd built. A framed note hung by the register. "Kindness always finds its way back. Victor." It became the bakery's heart, a reminder of the day that had set them on this path, a day that felt both distant and ever-present, its echoes woven into every loaf, every smile, every moment of connection. Years later, Ethan returned to the city as a grown man, an aerospace engineer shaping the future of flight, his dreams of the sky now a reality he could touch. One rainy afternoon, walking back from a meeting, the rain pattering softly on his umbrella, he turned a corner and saw a man slumped on a bench, coughing, his hands trembling, his face pale against the gray of the day. He was older, maybe 60, his coat worn, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Asthma," the man wheezed, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain, his hands clutching his chest. "Forgot my inhaler." Ethan didn't hesitate, his heart racing as he reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a spare inhaler he always carried, just in case, a habit he'd never broken, a reminder of the day that had changed everything. "Here," he said gently, placing it in the man's hand, his voice steady, his hands calm despite the urgency of the moment. The man inhaled, his breathing easing, the color slowly returning to his face as he closed his eyes, relief washing over him. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse, his eyes meeting Ethan's with a gratitude that mirrored Victor's all those years ago. "You didn't have to. I know," Ethan said, smiling gently, his heart steady, his shoulders relaxed. "But I wanted to." He stayed until help arrived, the rain soaking through his coat, the sound of the ambulance siren a distant echo as he watched the man being taken care of, his heart full as he walked away, knowing he'd come full circle, that he'd given back what he'd once received: a breath, a break, a beginning. The following week, Ethan visited Victor, the man who'd set him on this path, the man who'd seen something in him when the world had looked away. Victor was older now, his hair silver, his steps slower, but his eyes still sparkled with the same warmth, the same belief that had changed Ethan's life. They sat in the garden, the air cool with the scent of blooming roses, the petals soft and red against the green of the leaves. "I helped someone," Ethan said, sharing the story, his voice soft, his hands resting on his knees as he spoke. Victor smiled, his eyes crinkling with pride, his hands steady as he reached out to pat Ethan's shoulder. "Then you've done more than I ever could," he said, his voice a whisper, his words a testament to the legacy they'd built together. They sat in silence, watching the garden sway in the breeze, the roses nodding softly in the wind, their petals catching the light like tiny flames. Ethan looked to the sky, where clouds drifted like planes, their edges soft against the blue, and a quiet peace settled over him. "You were right," he said at last, his voice steady, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "One act of kindness can change a life." Victor nodded, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes shimmering with a gratitude that time couldn't dim. "It changed mine," he said, his words a quiet echo of the bond they'd shared, a bond that had begun with a single moment and now stretched across years, across lives, across dreams. And that, Ethan knew, was their legacy, not carved in stone or announced on stages, but in moments, quiet, simple, powerful, the kind that ripple outward, farther than anyone can measure, the kind that last forever. What's one act of kindness you've witnessed that changed a life? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how kindness has touched your world, how it's shaped the people you love, the people you've become. At Daily Narrated Stories, we're dedicated to bringing you tales like Ethan's, stories of hope, courage, and the resilience of the human spirit, stories that remind us of the power of a single act, the beauty of a single moment. If this story moved you, don't wait. Subscribe now and join our growing family. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support will help us share more life-changing stories, more moments of connection, more reasons to believe in the goodness of the world. Comment below, what stood out most to you? Rate this story from 1 to 10 and tell us where you're watching from. Our global community is beautiful, and we can't wait to connect with you, to hear your stories, to share in your dreams. Hurry! New stories are coming soon, and you won't want to miss a single one. Each one a reminder that kindness, when given freely, never fades, that it plants roots, grows in silence, and blossoms where it's least expected, changing the world one breath, one moment, one heart at a time.